Hi, this is Irv Shapiro of the Dr. Vax channel. And today I'm going to talk about software for 3D printing. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a program, a slicer that I hadn't used before. Now, Cura for me is like an old friend. I visit with Cura a couple times a week. I've done that for about 3 years. I know all of the nooks and crannies. I know how to fine-tune Cura to get great prints. PrusaSlicer was my first love. It was the first slicer I ever used, and I put it aside for a while, but I've come back to it in the last few months because of its strong support for customizable supports, because of its ability to easily manipulate multicolor prints where you change the filament at a specific layer, and because of the remarkable new top of print surface infill called monotonic infill. So Cura and PrusaSlicer are two software programs I use a lot. Today, I'm going to look with you at ideaMaker. And we're going to discover whether ideaMaker is going to make it onto my computer desktop, when I would use it, when I wouldn't use it, and even why I started looking at it. So stay tuned and let's learn something together. Now, before we talk about ideaMaker, a remarkable actually slicer, but more importantly, a remarkable component of an infrastructure, of an ecosystem that, as far as I can tell right now, is completely free, which is really a bit baffling because it is much broader than just a slicer. But before we get into that, I want to introduce anyone who's new to this channel to the Dr. Vax community. Dr. Vax is a community of people learning together how to use desktop technologies you can use right at home to make things. There's a lot of coverage of 3D printing and slicers and CAD programs for designing 3D models. There's also a bit of coverage of woodworking and programming and electronics. So if you want to hear about new videos as they come out, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell below. And I'm always interested in your comments. I can't reply to every comment personally, but because I can't reply to every comment personally, I created a discussion group, a forum at forum.drvax.com, where over 1,200 passionate viewers of these videos help each other out with questions about technology. Now let's talk about Raise3d. As you can see here, Raise3d brands itself under the phrase industrial 3D printing for flexible manufacturing. This is not a grade of printer that I can really review on this channel. And the reason is, if we look at their product line, their 3D printers begin at almost $3,500 and go up in price from there. These are machines that are specifically designed to go into an industrial setting, a factory floor, an engineering organization, a research lab, a university. What's interesting about Raise3d is all of their printers are dual extruder, dual nozzle printers. And because they all work with multiple filaments at the same time, the slicer they produced, ideaMaker, is optimized for that environment. But more importantly, ideaMaker is part of an overall system designed to produce a digital 3D printing factory. Now, to better understand the overall ecosystem that ImageMaker is part of, let's look at this picture together. This is called the Raise3d Ecosystem, and you'll see here it highlights a Raise3d factory. A factory consists of quite a number of 3D printers that are working together. ideaMaker is the slicer that produces the G-code for these printers. But then you upload this G-code to the Raise cloud. And in the Raise cloud, it schedules these jobs across printers. Now you can have a single printer and tell it to print on a single printer. And what's most important is the Raise cloud supports not only Raise3d manufactured 3D printers, it also supports, as you see here, other brands of 3D printers connected with Octoprint. So believe it or not, this ecosystem is free today. And you get up to 2 gigabytes of print storage. Now, I assume in the future there will be pricing for expanding that. Perhaps there'll be a charge for using third-party printers. But right now, ideaMaker and the Raise cloud are free. But there's even more. If you have a smartphone, an iPhone or an Android, there's a really good app that works with Raise cloud. Now, what that lets you do is to monitor your 3D printer from anywhere. Since your printer connects to Octoprint and Octoprint connects to the Raise cloud, you can access it from anywhere. So if we look at the Raise3d website, we'll see the first thing you see here is it's a free download for ideaMaker. Now, ideaMaker is a bit different. It is a proprietary product. It is not open source like Cura or PrusaSlicer. So theoretically, Raise3d could stop providing it to the community. I don't think that's likely, but it's possible. Right now, it's completely free. What's more remarkable, as we'll see, is the overall factory ecosystem is free. So let's scroll down this page a little bit, and you'll see they highlight a very unique feature. That's the ability to apply a texture to the outside of an existing model. Now, it doesn't apply to the top or the bottom. It wraps it around the model. So on the screen here, you'll see an example where they're wrapping a texture around a 3D print that then becomes an embossed texture around the outside. And we'll take a look at that together in the slicer. Their support for supports, I always find that to be an awkward phrase. Their capabilities for supports are excellent. And they have a unique capability here I'll also demonstrate, where you can have the system generate automatic supports, and then just by clicking on them, you can remove some of them. Very, very interesting capability. They do a number of optimizations. You can have it produce optimized, auto-optimized fill percentages throughout your model. You can have it produce auto-optimized supports throughout your model. So you're able to reduce your print times by using these optimizations and get consistent and reliable results. And then the next thing they do that's very, very well done is at any layer, it appears you can change any slicer parameter built into the slicer. But you can also take objects, blockers. This is sort of how some of the other slicers allow you to customize supports. You can take objects and lay them over your print, over your model, and use those to modify parameters. You can have multiple prints on your print bed printing with different parameters. And finally, a capability that I just love, because I used it to take this single color calibration cat and make it into a multicolor calibration cat in about a minute. It's the ability to slice your model, not as converting it from 3D to G-code, but to actually cut apart your model into pieces right on the screen. And then they're very good tools for aligning it back together, and then you identify each of those cuts as printing with a different material. which could be a different color filament, or perhaps even PLA and PETG or other materials combined together. Now, to better understand ideaMaker, let's start by looking at the files that you can use to define your ideaMaker environment. The first file is for your printer. And the printer definition defines the size of the bed, the number of extruders, some characteristics about your printer. That's pretty typical. What's really nice, though, is you can import and export these definitions easily. In Cura, that's a bit trickier. The second file is a bin file. That's the equivalent of a profile in most other 3D printers. They call it a template in ideaMaker because it's a set of rules. It's a template for producing 3D prints in your factory across potentially multiple printers. These templates have built-in support for IDEX, independent dual extruder features, just as the printer template has built-in support for multiple extruder printers. The third file listed here is the .filament file. Now this is really important because they do something that's a bit different. What's important here is in the definition it includes flow rate for your print. Now you can override that, but it's sort of hidden where you override it. So I started by making my first prints by just selecting Raise3d 1.75 millimeter PLA. I thought that would be close enough. My prints were heavily, extremely under extruded. What I realized finally was in the filament definition, they include flow rate. And so because flow rate is in that definition, I needed to define my own PLA filament definition and set the flow rate to 100%. So now let's look at the actual software and see how these components fit together. To install the software on your machine, you go to their website, you click on the Get for Free or whatever download tab. It'll take you to a download page that looks like this. You click on your operating system, you install it in the normal way. So when you first open up ideaMaker, it's a bit intimidating because it looks very different than things you've seen before. You have across the top, you have the standard functions for manipulating models. You have this wonderful Freecut capability we'll talk about. You have something I've never seen before in another slicer that we already mentioned called textures. An excellent repair capability for repairing models that are not completely closed properly. Connect, which is used only with Raise3d printers. Library, which goes to a library of templates and filament definitions on the Raise3d website, and Raise Cloud, which is that overall ecosystem that's very powerful. So let's start by defining a printer. The best way to define a printer is to go to the configuration wizard. In most cases, for most of my viewers, we're going to select Other. Let's call this Ender 3 V2. You define your print bed size. I believe the Ender is about 220 by 220 by, I don't know, 200, don't remember precisely. It has a heated bed, it has a controllable fan, it has one extruder. For right now, you can leave this blank because you're going to basically create your own filament. You'll see here I have PLA. So I'm just going to select Raise PLA, and as I mentioned before, that got me into a bit of trouble because that filament's defined with a flow rate of 94%. And the default action is export to disk. You'll see right here, you can set a default action to upload to Raise Cloud, and then from Raise Cloud, you can go to Octoprint, or you can send a print directly to Octoprint right from this printer definition. And here we have a single extruder. So I'm going to click OK and continue, continue, finish. And now we'll see we have a primary extruder on this printer, but we have no template. Now a template is in essence your 3D printing profile. So I could select a existing template if I had one. In this case, we don't. Now, instead of creating this from scratch right now, I'm going to switch my printer. So we'll go to current type of printer to Artist D, because then I'll have a template already defined. So before we look at the details of the template, the profile, let's load a model. So I'm going to click on Add, and I'm going to load a calibration cat. And then I'm going to click on my calibration cat here, and I can use my scroll wheel by rolling it to zoom in, by pressing it to move. And I'm going to actually scale this a bit to start with. Let's scale this up to, let's say, 300%. So now we have a bigger calibration cat. Now, the rest of the features up here are very similar to what you've seen in most slicers. You can delete it, you can set the view, you can pan, move around, you can move the object by pulling on these arrows on the print bed. You can rotate it, you can scale it. So those are relatively simple options we've seen before. Now, how would you go about printing it? Well, you either click on the Start Slicer button here or here, and they show you different things. If you click here, it's going to this page, and it's going to show you your default template for this item. If you don't have one, you can create one, or you can actually import one from the ideaMaker library on the web. I already have one in this particular case, so I could click here to edit it. Now, interestingly, if I have my model selected and I click on the play button over here, it goes to a different screen. This is the screen I most often use, and I can click on the gear here to edit my template. Now, what you'll see in here are the types of parameters you see in almost every slicer. The names are a bit different, and there is some help here. When you mouse over, you get tooltips, and you can click on help down here. When you click on help down here, it takes you to the Raise3d website, and the documentation is good, not spectacular. So let's go back now, and you can see you define your layers. On layers where you do have a spiral vase mode capability, with the path interpolation, which is sort of a more advanced feature that was recently introduced in Cura as an example. You do have separate settings for your first layer, and you have the types of small feature compensation you have in Cura and PrusaSlicer. You see here there's the ability to have a left extruder and a right extruder. In our case, we have two extruders, so these both show up. If you only have a single extruder, it'll just say primary extruder here. And what's really interesting is you can set the characteristics for each of these completely separately. Now, down here in this section, we have parameters specifically for IDEX or multi-extruder settings, which says when you switch from one extruder to the other, how do you keep that first extruder from dripping, oozing filament? Well, you retract a bit of filament, and so you can control that here. Infill is pretty typical, and you'll note you have all of the common infill types that you see across modern slicers. You can define a number of layers of solid infill for the top layers and the bottom layers. It does support ironing on this printer, on this slicer. Supports we'll get to in a moment. Standard platform capabilities for raft, skirt. They do give you the ability, though, which is interesting, to have a skirt, a brim, and a raft and sort of combine them together. Cooling support. And here's another very advanced feature, and that is you can set the cooling for individual layers. Really an interesting capability. Likewise, you can set the temperature for individual layers. So to do a A temperature test for, let's say, stringing would be trivial. You just set up a profile with all of the different temperatures you're looking for over here. And you can control temperatures for the bed, for the left extruder, for the right extruder. Speed settings are relatively simple and straightforward. It does support setting acceleration and jerk controls. And this whole page, the ooze page, is really about controlling stringing, in particular stringing with multi-nozzle 3D printers. And so you can create a wipe wall. A wipe wall is a wall around, actually a shell around a print, so that when the printhead comes up to the print, it first prints a shell around, and that catches all the oozing. Then it moves in and prints your print. Or you could have a wipe tower. A wipe tower is literally that. It's a tower that will get printed to collect the oozing before it goes to your print. I've tried the wipe tower, not the wipe wall. The wipe tower actually worked quite well. At other, you have some other really remarkable features. One is pause at height. It's built right in. So if you want to actually change filaments at a particular point, you just put a pause right in your print. It will stop your print at that point, and you can continue from there. Texture we'll look at in a moment. And then this is very important. Under gCode, not only does it have the ability to insert gCode at the standard places, but you'll notice here, I can have different gCode when I have one extruder versus two extruders. Now, the only way I know of to do that in Cura is to define completely separate printer definitions. So you define a printer definition for your printer when using it with one extruder, separate with two. Now, that's not a really hard thing to do, but this is very, very nice. They also completely document all of the variables you can use in your gCode, and something I haven't really seen in other slicers is you can have logic in your gCode. You can have if conditions. You can say, if two extruders do this, if one extruder do this, if temperature is over this, do this. Remarkable capability. So I'm going to assume these parameters are all right, and I'm going to click here on Slice. You'll now see there's an option to upload this to the Raise cloud, where I could control it from my phone, or I could upload it directly to Octoprint, or I could export it to a standard gCode file. We're going to click on Preview. It does take a second to render the preview, and the preview quality is okay. It's not the best I've seen. You do have the ability to scroll through the layers. You can look at individual layers. One of the things I found that did not work very well, which is much better in Prusa and in Cura, are the ability to look at the movements in a layer. When you move this, it's pretty hard to see unless you turn on current layer only, and then you can see it a bit. You can see that drawing it, but they don't give you any indication of where the printhead is. That would be a really nice addition. You can turn on the ability to show retractions, to show travel moves or not, and you can turn on or off various components. Now, another really interesting capability is you can click on this tool over here. And with this tool over here, you can turn on a plane, and then you can take and move that plane somewhere inside your model, let's say right over there, and enable it, and it's going to cut your model. And now I can look inside my model. I'm going to turn the plane off. I can look inside my model from a different angle. Now, there also is a capability to use this to print just that part of the model. So cross sections are another interesting advanced capability. And from here, as I said, you can click on the various buttons here to upload, send it to a local printer, to send it to Raise Cloud, or send it to Octoprint. Now, when you send it to Octoprint, You also have the ability to go to Octoprint on the web via a browser and monitor it the way you normally would. So let's close this preview, and I'm going to delete this model now, and let's look at support for just a moment. So let me add in a model here, which I call a support test. We'll zoom in a bit, and here's a remarkable capability. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to click on support. And I'm going to say create auto supports. And you'll see it's added supports here. And if I zoom in, I can actually see the individual pillars. Now, I can go here and click on the button that says remove. And I could select individual pillars. So maybe I don't need that one and that one. And maybe I don't need this one and this one. Look at how easy that is to modify the automatically generated supports. I think that's a remarkable capability. I can also add in supports using a similar capability. So let's zoom this around, and you have to put that in a place where it makes sense. And there I added a support. So adding and removing supports is really quite easy. It's done extremely well. Now I will tell you, if you're using support towers like this, when they're not connected to each other, if you make them too small, that's the pillar size, they won't stick well to your print bed. So if you use relatively small pillars, you probably want to print a raft underneath. Okay, now let me delete this model, and let's look at one more feature. And let's look at two more features that are really quite interesting. So I'm going to add a calibration cat back in. I'm going to take and scale that to 300%. Move it back down. And now let's add a texture to the surface of this cat. So I'm going to select it. And then I'm going to go over to texture. I'm going to select custom texture. And I'm going to add in a texture. Now I've downloaded these textures from the Raise3d website, but a texture is just a black and white image. It can be in a variety of different formats. And the white areas will be at the original surface level, and the black areas will be embossed on top. But I can also import from the ideaMaker library. And here you will see a whole range of textures. So let's say I wanted to select this one here. I could download it manually to my file, or I could import it. And you'll see when you import to ideaMaker, but it basically does is it puts a URL into the cut and paste buffer. And now I'm going to go back here. It will recognize it. I'm going to say download, next. And now I've added a texture to this. I can take and manipulate a variety of items here to manipulate that texture, where it's located, how it particularly wraps around the item. And now let's go ahead and slice this to see what that looks like. We're going to go to preview. And you can see now that the texture, if we zoom in here, is embossed on the surface. And actually, if I go down to a lower level, you can see here how it actually is cut in and out of the surface. Remarkable capability that I haven't seen in other slicers. I want to show you one more thing that I find magic. We're going to import our cat one more time. I'm going to scale this. We'll scale it this time to 200%. And now I'll rotate it around here. So let's say I wanted to make just the ears a different color. Well, how could I do that? Well, I click on this and then I click on Freecut. And now I move that plane up and down. So we're going to move it to right here. And I'm going to say start the cut. Okay, now this is different from this. Notice I can click on them separately, and I can define what extruder they use separately. So if I right click here, I can say it's the left extruder or the right extruder. We'll put the ears on the right extruder, and we will put the base on the left extruder. Now if I go to slice this, it's going to generate an error. And the reason is, if you look down here, it says non-manifold edges. Well, because I cut this model apart, the triangles that make up the 3D architecture are no longer properly closed. So I need to select this and then shift and select the ears so it's all selected and click on repair. Click OK, and now everything is fine. So now I could take and slice this model. And at this point, it's going to change tools. Now you can change Freecut to be vertical, horizontal, of various rotations and angles. Now, let's say I inadvertently move the ears over, or I've imported two models for a two-color print. Well, if I want to align them together, I can just select the ears, shift and select the body, go to Model, Align Selected Models, and it will align them back to their original position or origin, the position they were designed to sit in the CAD program. So what are my thoughts about ideaMaker? I am very, very impressed. Let's summarize my thoughts in a couple slides. First, things that I found to be challenges. Well, I found it a little harder to learn than Cura. The screen resolution on my Mac wasn't perfect. It was slightly blurry. The layer view is not as pretty as Cura or Simplify 3D or PrusaSlicer. And there's no basic search capability when you're setting a parameter. Now let me show you a little trick. And this is important to show you anyways. And that is, when you're setting up to print, down here right below your print is sort of the simple mode. And so without clicking on the gear, I can see all of the simple things I might want to change, and I can change them right here. I can add anything I want to that simple mode. When I click on add, I get a search capability. So that's a way I can find all of the individual settings. But when I'm in the gear mode here, I would have loved to see a search capability somewhere. And unless I'm missing it, I really just don't see it. Now, as far as I know, there is no direct USB support, but Octoprint works really well. There are no tree supports like you have in Cura, but the support capabilities you do have are the easiest to manipulate of any slicer I've used. And every time you go into printers, you're going to see all the Raise3d printer models. That's just a slight annoyance. Now, what are the pluses? Outstanding IDEX support, including separate gCode start code when you're using the printer with one extruder or with two extruders. Support capabilities are outstanding. The freeform slicing up of models and realigning them is unique. Textures are wonderful. The mesh repair works very, very well. And a number of people in the various forums I participate in have reported better quality. I haven't printed enough prints to know that for sure, but I can tell you I've just enjoyed this slicer. Well, folks, I hope you found this useful. If you did, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, leave some comments, let me know what you think. If you want to leave more extensive comments or post photos of some of your prints and discuss them with hundreds and hundreds of other people, I believe it's over 1,200 people now, go to forum.drvax.com. Thanks so much. Have a great day, and let's continue to learn together.